It's Ivy Slater, and you're listening to Her Success Story podcast, a show where gutsy businesswomen share their success journey. Hi, this is Ivy Slater. Welcome to today's episode of Her Success Story. Today, I have had the honor and pleasure of, over the last few months, getting to know Heather Maio-Smith. Heather is dynamic, brilliant, fun. Also, one of the founders of a company called StoryFile, which is revolutionizing the way we connect with each other by introducing conversational video with audio-visual technology at the forefront of this generation. StoryFile magically turns a video into a conversation through the click of a button. The next generation of technology uses artificial intelligence to support video conversations on any device. StoryFile transforms traditional one-way video, which we all get, and we're all doing video these days, into a two-way conversation. It is the biggest audiovisual evolution since the video was first created. Heather and the founder of her company and her co-founder have taken this concept and used it in incredible dynamic ways that honestly touched my heart so much that I truly had to have her as a guest on Her Success Story. So Heather, thank you for joining me here today.
Thank you for having me. And wow, that was probably the most impressive intro I think I've ever gotten. Can I take you everywhere with me?
Well, guess what? It's being recorded. You can take it and take it forward.
Yeah, this is true. Thank you.
So tell me a little bit, let's talk about the evolution, because StoryFile is a technology, and more importantly, it's so much more. So let's get this tech stuff out of the way in a way, like talk about the technology, but then we really talk about like your background and how you're using it, because it's making a massive impact.
Thank you. Yeah, my pleasure. The technology, it's interesting. When we started it in 2010. And, there wasn't any speech recognition, barely. It certainly didn't work.
There is that.
And then, Skype didn't even come into its own until about 2012. So what we really banked on in 2010 was I had this idea, or this need, actually, and isn't all great technology created from some kind of need?
Correct.
This need to replicate conversations with individuals who had passed away. And I don't know, I saw different technologies emerging and thought, this has to be possible. We have to be able to do this in some way. I tried to talk to the USC Shoah Foundation and get them on board, but that took me almost 2 years to do. Not
and the USA. So the USC Shoah Foundation, just for reference, what is that?
So that is the institute that Steven Spielberg set up after he did Schindler's List to capture and record any Holocaust survivor story that wanted to tell it. In the end, I think they recorded over 55,000 Holocaust survivors around the world. And so since this idea was it was a new methodology in recording biography, and I thought, okay, this is an international organization and institute. I could have done this for a museum, but it wouldn't have had the life that it needed to have afterwards, unless it sat in that institute. So I pushed really hard, and what was interesting is I did have a relationship with the executive director of the USC Shoah Foundation at the time,
right?
Who completely got it, of course, because his whole PhD was written about, we haven't asked, all the questions yet, or, he came to the conclusion in this PhD, this was like 20 years ago, before this, that it Holocaust memory and their testimony had to be based on conversations that you have, because you wouldn't get the real story if you were just listening to their narrative.
Right.
So,
Well,
yeah,
because conversation, like one of the reasons
right,
we do in interviews,
mhm,
right, for to gain insight, because
right.
if somebody just talks, we talk from stream of consciousness, maybe even if we made notes,
Mhm.
but a great interview asks in questions that pulls out other pieces of information.
And follow-up questions, and yeah,
Correct.
yeah.
So
Um,
you started it, you have a background as far as some Holocaust knowledge. And so like share a little bit about, and that was the birth of this.
yeah.
And now we have to talk about the evolution of
Mhm.
this.
So I had fallen into this kind of career as an experiential designer for exhibitions, and one of the areas I began to specialize in, coincidentally, became intergenerational Holocaust memory. So we were interviewing a lot of Holocaust survivors, but interviewing their children and their grandchildren. And in some cases, I even got to interview their great grandchildren. But what was interesting was not necessarily the videos that I was creating for these exhibitions. It was more the conversations that we were having. And I said, you just can't lose this. Like my kids, my grandkids will never have the opportunity to have these conversations that I was having. And they were so inspiring and incredible stories that I was driven to just, I needed to find a way to replicate that. So, you know, a few years later, we actually did a proof of concept, because we didn't know if it would have the effect on the public that we wanted it to. It was pretty good. It was good. It had promise. So then we ended up doing a pilot. But we didn't before I did this, I didn't know where to find the technology. So what I had to do was put together all the pieces and the people that I thought were working on things and working on the infrastructure that could actually end up doing it. Nothing like it had ever been done before, but that didn't mean that we couldn't build it. Um, so I found a lot of different like groups. They were actually called labs, and they happened to be in one particular institute all together, but they hadn't really talked to each other or worked with each other before. And it also happened to be, because, and believe me, I've looked all over the world, it happened to also be a USC institute. And they mainly specialized in special effects for the movie industry, and like,
Which makes sense for
yeah,
USC that has a major film
yeah,
school, et cetera, et
yeah.
cetera.
So I went to them and I said, would you be interested in working on this with us? And of course, thankfully they said yes. Um, we ended up doing that pilot, and the pilot, it got just amazing reactions from the public. And it did what we thought and what we intended it to do, which was remarkable. After, 4 years, 5 years of working on it, to have that moment was incredible. But the one question I kept getting from the public the most was, can I do this myself? Can I do this for my grandfather? Can I do this for my aunt who's just diagnosed with a terminal illness? Can I do this with my parents? Can I do this for the founder of our company, for institutional memory? And so after a while, you can't ignore
Right.
thousands.
You have to figure out how to say yes. How
How
do
do
you
we
do
say that?
this?
Yeah, how do we do this? Because the system that we had developed was really a manual process, and it wasn't online at all. It was super expensive to do. Um, so if you were going to do this and make this ubiquitous, what we knew was it had to be automated, it had to all be online, and you had to be able to use any recording device that people currently had at their fingertips, which was increasingly becoming their cell phones or mobile
Right.
phones, mobile devices, and their laptop computers. It wasn't, nobody had a video cam anymore. You maybe had to have a webcam on your computer, but um, all of that, and the infrastructure and the for example 5G coming out, we knew it was on the horizon, but we had to build this when there was 3G and 4G.
Right.
3G in some countries, LTE in some other countries, and 4G in some countries.
And
And
I want to make a point here because it's every you had to create this that it could be global
right,
from the onset, not add it later,
right,
because your demand was coming from global.
right. Yeah, it had to
So
be global, and you had to be able, I mean, obviously there are going to be some places in the world that just don't have fast enough internet for you to do an interview, you know, in uh, just question, right? You do have to, if you are in one of those zones where your internet's not great, you are going to have to wait for it to upload. But we
right.
didn't want that to happen. We didn't want that experience to be, a showstopper for people doing it. And we didn't want it to be frustrating. So we had to advance uploading and video, uploading, downloading, and everything had to come together, if it
Yeah.
will, and we we pushed natural language processing, we pushed the AI, we pushed video playback, and the whole concept of filming everything online and not local at all. So
Right.
it's
So you've
amazing.
played with for a dozen years to get it where it is today. So let's
Right.
talk about
Right.
what StoryFile is today and how it's being used.
It's being used in a variety of ways. When we set out to do this, it was originally just so families and people could record their stories for legacy purposes. But soon people kept saying, okay, well, can I do it for HR? Can I do it for, can we do these type of interviews for dating apps? Can we do this
Mm.
type of interviews for, finding products in a store or buying a car? And why can't I just, anywhere that you have questions that you answer on a daily basis, you can do a story file and you will never have to answer those basic questions again. So what it allows you to do is have conversations that are completely different now because you already have had that base conversation, and then so the teacher that gets the same follow-up questions after the lecture can do all of those follow-up questions and give the students their story file, and they can go and have at it and then come to them when they really have very difficult questions that they need to talk about. So it's corporate training, it's all of those
So
manuals
there is
that
somewhat of a, so moving it past of the initial knowledge base, so when we think about video, we
right,
think about video of, you know, for lack of a better word, and again, listeners, no, I am not the tech guru here. Uh, that we think about video and we think about it as a flat dimension. It's a flat screen. We see it flat. How is StoryFile different? Because like I could record a video and do a training, right, and give it to an HR or
right,
give it, or I could talk about the legacy, the building of Slater's success, and I could capture
right,
that in the Zoom where somebody can
right.
interview me. How is StoryFile different?
Well, okay, so if you did an interview, or if you did a typical lecture, let's say, about Slater, and it was about, let's say it's 20 minutes to 3 hours long. The person has to watch that entire video or watch whatever video you edited from that content. And
Right.
you have your own idea of what the message you want those people to know is. Now, what if you flipped it on its head and said, all right, I want the listener to decide what they want to learn or what they want to know. I want the listener to be able to ask their own follow-up questions. That's what this allows you to do. It allows you to take that lecture, give it, but then it allows you to answer questions about that lecture that really dive deeper into the different parts that you didn't discuss. Or maybe there was something that was a little bit unclarified that they want clarification on. So it allows you to really have that conversation after even going through a lecture, or even, you can even start with the conversation as if you're getting to know someone at a cocktail party. What questions do you ask people when you first meet them? What do you want to know? And then that leads you on some path, that goes on and on and on. I heard this quote from Bill Nye the other day, and it was, you will never meet anyone that you can't learn something from.
That is so true.
And I've always felt that about people, and it's always been so amazing to me to have these conversations with people, that I just want other people to be able to have them as well. And people that they wouldn't have access to, even presidents. Like, what would our world be like if every single student in this country could have a conversation with Martin Luther King today, could have a conversation with any president in the past? And there will be, some people are saying, oh, but our best years are away, and all these people have died already, and da da da. Okay, there is a way to do it with a digital recreation, and you can have a conversation with them, but it has to be based in authentic conversations that those individuals would have had, which is very difficult to do. I wouldn't, I'm not a proponent of deep fakes or putting any words in anyone's mouth, which is
Right.
which is primarily why we do these videos of the real
Right.
people.
So let's
We
talk
don't
about,
want, I don't want my grandmother, I don't want people putting words in her mouth and that be her legacy for future generations. I want her to tell her story.
right. So we can capture our stories for our children and our grandchildren and our great grandchildren, right?
Right.
We can capture stories from founders of companies from way back. We can,
Right.
right? We can capture story, right? So when we're found, although we let's say we founded a company like
Mhm.
StoryFile, you
Mhm.
could capture this story now, and in 20 years, people can say, "Hey, but if I could ask the founder anything, what could that be? I would like to ask them this, and that would be available to them."
What if every student could talk to Bill Gates and have a conversation with him? What
Ooh,
would that,
powerful.
how would that inspire millions and millions of kids? Time Magazine right now, is Time for Kids, is doing a project for kind of like career day, but they're interviewing people that have very, different jobs. And these kids now will be able to ask them questions about their job, how they get into it, what kind of schooling, what they think about it, any question they want, really, about it. And it's in, it's incredibly inspiring, and it's, when people ask their own questions, it's a different type of engagement, it's a different type of learning than
Well,
if.
because we're coming from a place of our own individual's curiosity.
Right, right,
And
exactly.
you would have a different question than myself.
Right.
Our kids might have different questions.
Mhm.
Our girlfriends,
Mhm.
business associates, everybody would have different questions.
Right.
And we might say, like, oh, Heather, I would say, like, oh, Heather, that's a great question. I'm curious about that too. But my question might not be the same.
Right, right. So this
So
gives you the opportunity to ask your own question.
So this is so intriguing, and you and I, as we have talked before, can go on for hours. Um, Share with our listeners, because we do keep these her success stories, that it's an easy piece that you could learn enough and want to lean in for more. How could
Mhm.
our listeners continue to follow you, learn more about StoryFile, and connect?
Um, Storyfile.com, and we're on LinkedIn, all the normal social media channels as well. But have a look at storyfile.com and go to the product storyfilelife.com and try it out for yourself. There's a free trial. You can try it out. You can have your family members, it's a very limited, it's only 30 questions that you're answering, but it's fun to do, and then just, have,
It's a beginning, it's a starting point.
yeah, see what your family says. You can only ask so many questions, but um it's fun to do. It's interesting to do, and it's an amazing experience to do with your family members, because you don't often get time or take time to actually have these conversations with your family members until it's too late. And then you don't know things you wished you had asked and you wished you had had those conversations. This kind of forces you to have those conversations. And you, as an interviewer, learn so much. I have yet to have one family tell me that they didn't learn something new about their relative that they had never known through doing these
I love
interviews.
it.
Yeah.
I love it. So, listeners, as we come to the conclusion of today's Her Success Story, you want to check out storyfile.com as well as storyfilelife.com. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn. Everything is in the show notes below. So make it easy. If you say, how did you spell that? Was you are not sure? Just look below and click. At this time, I always like to say, take a moment and say, in listening today, what was your biggest takeaway or aha moment? What resonated with you? And then what action are you going to take forward for yourself, your life, your business, your career, your family from popping in and listening? Feel free to share that with us either at Her Success Story at slatersuccess.com. And I look forward for you to continuing to join us on on Her Success Story in the future. Thank you for joining us here today.
To shine.